Thanks everybody for being here. For me, this is going to be like my favorite topic. I love nerding out on data. So I wanted to talk to these guys. We got an amazing panel, so I'm glad everybody's here. I've got Bill Meese from E1 is here. I got Randy Nichols from Force Media Management, Ryan Downey from Superhero Artist Management, Vivian Wang, who is a adjunct professor at USC, and Mike Mowry, of course, is here from 10th Street Entertainment. Ryan, let me start with you, if you don't mind. What's the big opportunity with data that most developing artists, at least, they miss?
Well, it's really, I mean, metrics and data, it's really the only tangible evidence we have of what's effective in terms of what artists are doing to reach their existing audience, to nurture them, develop them, and to ultimately broaden what they're doing. I think, you know, in years past, prior to, say, maybe that long tail idea that came around in, you know, the early 2000s, mid 2000s, the idea was just total blanketing of everything, right? Like just an all-out blitzkrieg with your marketing, where you're just trying to get to as many people as possible at all times. And I think as media became further and further diversified, and you know, when it became a situation where if you were really into cooking, you had 3 different satellite channels you could watch about cooking, the idea that you were going to penetrate mass media with an artist became even more of a, you know, 1 in a million shot, right? Like it got to a point where by the mid 2000s, where the #1 song most people probably didn't know, just like the #1 TV show. You know, when I think most of us who are, probably all of us who are on this, when we were kids growing up with 3 networks or 4 networks, the #1 rated sitcom pretty much everyone had seen. You know, all the shows that were in syndication we had all watched. And that's changed so dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years that it's much more about kind of laser focusing and to target the people who are most likely to be responsive to what you're doing. You're not trying to reach everybody anymore because it's virtually impossible. You're trying to reach, you know, a very specific demographic that is going to be turned on to your movie or your book or your band. So I think, you know, the constant chasing and refining of data is really the only tool that you have to know what's working and what isn't working. You know, you can, it's tangible results about the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of different strategies. So I think it's probably the most important thing, aside from the #1 most important thing, which is making something that you love and feel passionate about that other people might connect to.
Bill, I see you nodding there. Have you seen a growing acceptance at E1 of data and using it? And how are you guys using it today? What's something that you're doing now that you weren't doing, say, 5 years ago?
Well, 5 years ago, I feel like in our world is a lot longer than it feels like, right? But 5 years ago, we literally weren't doing anything that we're doing now. And, you know, this stuff moves so quickly that, you know, even 6 months goes by and, you know, certain things can change, certain trends can change, certain bellwether data points, as we talked about, will change. But I was nodding because Downey hit it on the head. It's not so much about, you know, slicing data for the sake of data. It's slicing data for the sake of the audience, and segmenting out that audience into, you know, hyper segmentation, which you then can hyper target. And yeah, that's it.
Well, Vivian, I know that a lot of people get scared when they hear that they're being narrowcasted to, or that people are you know, was it the Facebook ran into trouble when turns out that a lot of their data was being used to really, really micro-target individuals. Should people, as fans, should they be frightened of this, or is this as beneficial as it is detrimental?
Well, I think speaking personally, it is, yeah, I think fans and consumers should be wary of their data online and how it's being captured and used. And I do want to pull on like that thread that Ryan and Bill were referring to, is that absolutely data is supposed to help you target your fans. And just to, again, like pulling that thread a little bit, it's all about increasing a consumer's willingness to pay, right? So you have a threshold of what a person's willing to pay, like say for a concert ticket. And then you have what it costs for that product. And that gap is your profit. So it's not only just about using data to like target and find those people, but how can you bring more value, like push that threshold of that consumer's willingness to pay, so that you could not, it's not about like everyone's grabbing at $1. It's about creating more value using data. So there's $100 that everyone can split. And I think that's what we're seeing, the level of data we're able to collect and use help us create more value, not just find the value, but create more of it. You know what I mean?
So is that, would you say that it's, from your experience, and perhaps you haven't seen this firsthand, but would you suspect that getting a fan from, say, spending $25 to instead spend $75 is a lot easier or more difficult than getting someone who wouldn't spend anything to spend $1?
Right. I think, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Gotcha. And so, like, would you look at data then as an area of opportunity for maximizing an artist's already existing fan base, and that being more valuable than, say, trying to develop a fan base?
Well, I think developing and maximizing are like the two sides of the same coin, right? So for a developing artist, like using, especially when it comes to the streaming data, what Spotify is able to provide, and I'm sure you're going to touch on this, Paul, so I don't want to like go too deep into it, but it can absolutely help you see what's working, what's not working, and again, provide more value in terms of music that not only the artist loves to create, but their fans love to listen to.
Awesome. Randy, do you need a lot of data for it to be actionable?
Yeah, you don't need a lot of data. You need the right data. Like that's what's most important. And like I've just recently, as an example, was launching some new T-shirt designs for an artist working with a merch company that doesn't have a great data portal. And it's really frustrating for me when I'm launching something. I want to know which platform it's performing on, because that's the platform to focus more on. You may want to start spending a little money against that against those social posts to fine tune and hit those fans even closer. And so it's always about what data, because in that sense, it's literally, I just want to know where people are coming from. Like what platform is most important to me? And without knowing that, it's useless. So it's not a lot of information in that scenario, but it's the right information is what's super important. And you can overwhelm yourself looking for every data point. And every data point isn't necessarily important. Like knowing how many fans you have from 50 to 60 years old versus 30 to 40 years old, there's less uses for that most likely than knowing what social platform they're coming from when they're buying your merch.
Well, can you go into that a little bit more? Because I think that's really interesting. Like, I guess my question would be, how often is it that the data that you find useful comes directly from the place where you're looking to sell or looking to spend or looking to, you know what I mean? Like, is Facebook the best place for Facebook and Instagram data? Or is it a question of like, well, you can leverage data that you get from one source and it's going to be much more, it could be as useful or even more useful someplace else?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I love at looking, like using Shopify as an example, looking at your analytics dashboard within Shopify when you're launching a new merch item, it's so interesting because you can look at it and go, okay, that Instagram story is what's driving traffic. But sometimes it changes depending on the act, depending on the message, depending on the platform, how engaged people are on a certain platform at a certain time. Like we've gone through moments where doing messages on bands in town drove more sales than Instagram, and make no sense to me. I couldn't believe it, but it happened. And then, looking at Shopify again, one of the really cool things is it'll tell you where your traffic's coming from everywhere. And we got some press about, I think we were doing like a new tour, and it was VIP packages. I honestly don't remember what the item was, but I was able to tell which publications were driving the highest revenue for the band, so that when I'm launching my next merch item around a specific event or tickets or whatever, if I give that exclusive story to the publication that's driving the most sales, I should, in theory, then see a higher level of sales on our next tour if we gave, an advance notice to that publication in exchange for higher coverage.
And I imagine
I have the same example, if I may. The Shopify dashboard is something I think we're all familiar with. But one example I've done on my end is that I noticed an increased traffic from South America. This is a couple months ago, like a serious increase of traffic from South America. And I could not figure out why. It was not, we weren't running ads anywhere. There was no touring. Like there was no indication why those metrics were going up. But I had the idea, it's like, well, why don't we do a commercial in Spanish and run it and target each of those countries that are performing the highest, among all the different countries that were, hitting in South America. And it was successful. It turned out to be, something that, it wasn't, something that, was setting off alarms anywhere. But point being is that we took that data that we otherwise would never have known and turned it into another actionable item that had fruitful outcomes, which was cool.
That's great. Mike, are there any data sources or particular metrics that for you are just like, at this point, they're just, you need to see them every day. You need to see them once a week.
For me, with the artists, right this second, I'm focusing on what drives revenue and what I've got control over. That's what I'm looking at every day. So like many of these people, I'm trying to sling t-shirts for our artists. And that involves looking at the Shopify stuff. We have a pretty robust campaign that we're running on, the Facebook ad manager. So I'm looking at that data with the experts that we've hired to do all of that. That said, I am going to the record label quite frequently to talk about what's happening with the Spotify and all of the streaming data. So those are really the main ones that I'm looking at each and every day.